everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Bob Goodwin. I'm the founder of Career Club. If you haven't checked us out before, you're welcome to go to our website at career.club, where you can learn more about how we're using proven sales methodologies and tools to help people like you find a career that matters. So today is a live. So whether you're on LinkedIn or on YouTube, we encourage you to offer your comments, questions. We'd like to make this interactive and make this more of a group call if possible. I also want to, as always, thank my colleague, Heather. She is the brains and magic behind this event. So thank you, Heather. Our topic today is called Going Solo, and our guest is David Shriner-Cahn. David's had his own business for 15 years, 10 strategy partners. Before that, he worked in the corporate world for 28 years. David is also the host of two really successful podcasts. One's called Smashing the Plateau, and the other one's called Going Solo. And with that, I'd like to welcome our guest, David Shriner-Cahn. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's great to be here.
Well, it's really a privilege to have you. For the folks listening who don't know David, David is a very prolific podcaster. We'll talk about that in a minute. But he's also has his strategy business where he works with entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, consultants, people who are basically working for themselves. And we're going to dig in a little bit deeper on some thoughts that you have about that, David. But before we get started, and you are uniquely qualified to be able to do this little bit of an icebreaker, what we call Rock's Fab Five. And so just kind of a little quick lightning round session to help our guests get to know you a little bit better. So question number one is, where were you born and raised?
Asbury Park, New Jersey. So Jersey Shore.
Awesome. So you and Bruce Springsteen, I guess, were pals?
Well, I wouldn't say that we hung out together necessarily. Plus, he's from a different town. He actually grew up in Freehold.
Oh, listen to you. So you are a fan, though, then, right?
Yeah. Although he became
What's it called?
famous
Stone
by
Pony?
playing. Yeah, he became famous by playing at the Stone Pony, which is in Asbury Park.
Yeah, super cool, awesome. And then, secondly, school education.
So I have a master's in chemical engineering from Cornell. Undergraduate, Lafayette College, also chemical engineering. And in between, I was at the Technion in Israel for a year on a Fulbright Hayes scholarship.
And I'm sorry, so I'll show my ignorance. Can you explain a little bit more about what that school is?
It's a, I would say, similar to like MIT.
Yep.
So it's the premier technical university in Israel.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, obviously we have a very bright guest. And my older brother is also a chemical engineer, graduate degree, Stanford. And I always tell people he's the smart one, I'm the friendly one. So there, we can have our roles down on that. Chemical engineer, very impressive.
But unlike me, maybe he still works as an engineer.
He does actually. And a little bit about your family.
Married, been married for almost 42 years,
Awesome.
Two children, two great children-in-law, and two wonderful grandchildren.
Oh, that's awesome. Are they in the States? Or are they near where you guys are?
Very near. They're everybody is in New York City.
Oh, that's a blessing. Well, good for you. And then, I kind of did a little bit of about your career and your 15 years with your consulting practice and 28 years before that as an employee. Do you mind just kind of giving a little bit more color to that?
Sure. So, as you heard, I spent a lot of time studying engineering. I worked as an engineer for the first 4 years of my career. Then I went into the not-for-profit sector in executive roles, which I did for a little over 23 years. And then I started my own business, first as just an independent consultant working on my own. And that has evolved, which I'm sure we're going to talk about.
Yep, cool. And then lastly, kind of outside of work, I'm going to guess family is going to be one of the answers, but what are your passions, interests when outside of work?
Yeah, well, we are blessed to have our immediate family very close by, so we do get to spend a lot of time with our offspring, which is terrific. And I live in New York City, so I love doing New York things. We have a subscription to the New York Philharmonic, which thankfully has restarted this year.
Yeah.
We have a subscription to one of the theaters in town, so we get to see live theater on a regular basis. There's no shortage of stuff to do here.
I was going to say, well, thankfully things have opened up a bit more, so you can start to enjoy all the things that make New York such a great, great city. So awesome. Well, let's kind of dive into a little bit of the content. I was so excited to have you on, David, because, you have developed over the years expertise in entrepreneurship and coaching people and people like me. And I've benefited greatly from, your kind of acquired wisdom over the years of people that are, doing their own thing, and particularly people who have left a corporate job after, some period of time and now are, kind of parlaying that into, working for themselves. One of the ways that that's manifested itself is with your podcasting, with Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo. Do you mind just sort of describing those two programs for a minute?
Sure. So I started my first podcast in 2014. That was Smashing the Plateau. Mm-hmm. We have released episodes every week since then. So it's over 7 years of consistent content. Initially, I started the podcast as a way to create some increased awareness and credibility. It's not like there was this, really, I would say, rock solid strategy behind it. But what I saw, like in my career, and this is something I've done, whether I was an employee or an entrepreneur, look around at other people who I thought were doing things that that I wasn't doing, that I thought would be helpful to me and my career. And as a consultant, I saw that consultants that I thought were successful and perhaps more successful than I was, or doing things that I wasn't doing, they were creating content. And I started a blog in 2012. That was the first foray into content creation. Did that consistently for about 2 years, and then went deeper in the type of content using podcasts. And so that was the initial reason for starting Smashing the Plateau. I had no idea when I started it whether I thought I would be any good at it, whether I would like it, how I'd feel about it. But I did it. And one of the things I've learned about content creation, whether it's podcasting or what you're doing with your live video feeds, Bob, or any other kind of content, is don't wait too long. If you're not embarrassed by the first episode or first bit of content you released, and you've probably waited too long. So when I go back and listen to the first episode, which you can still get on our website, first episode, it was very different than the kind of conversations that I'm able to host today. We all evolve, but get started. So anyway, so I started the first show, and one of the things that I discovered that I hadn't anticipated, because I was focused on, okay, what can we actually produce for the audience? How do we build an audience? I discovered that actually podcasting is a great tool to build relationships with guests if you have an interview-based show. And I was connecting with guests that were doing all kinds of great things in the world as entrepreneurs, kinds of people that I would have taken me much longer to connect with doing the kind of business networking or other kind of relationship building that I was doing. So I actually found that one of the big benefits was connecting with people, not just the audience, but also the guests. So that was sort of how things got started with the first show. And then the second show, Going Solo, after podcasting for about 5 years, I started doing some self-reflection on what I thought the podcast was doing for our audience, what I felt like it was doing for me and my business. And I realized that I would say a good bit of our audience, and frankly, many of the guests were solopreneurs like me, people that were independent consultants or coaches, or, they had a particular niche, and they were the primary offering that they were selling to their clients.
Yes.
In doing a little further analysis, I also realized that many of them, like me, had been an employee first for a long period of time. And I did a little bit of market research, which really was, it was prompted by one email that I sent out to our list, where I I asked for feedback from the readers. He said, I'm thinking about exploring this topic of going solo. I don't think I had the name yet for the show, but this topic of going from employee to consultant later in your career. What do you think? It was the most opened email I think I've ever sent. And so clearly I hit a nerve, and I started scheduling follow-up one-on-one calls with people that responded. I had tons of calls. I discovered a few things. One is, yes, this is a pretty common scenario. The other thing I discovered is many of the people that I had known for a long time started their consulting business when they got fired from their job. So they may have wanted to be independent, but they didn't actually take action until they got pushed. Yeah. So, and actually that was my story as well. I really wanted to be a consultant, but I knew that my job was likely to end at some point because there was some redundancy going on in my organization. It had nothing to do with my performance, but I knew that at some point I was probably going to be asked to leave. And I did wait until that happened, until I started my business. But I discovered that, there's this niche of very accomplished professionals that are experts in their field that reach a point in their career where it doesn't work so well anymore to be doing it as an employee, and they've never run their own business. And you can do really great work for your clients, but if you don't know how to run a business, you may suffer financially and in other ways. And so I discovered that there was this pretty big need to help people figure out how to be as successful as possible when they make that transition from employee to entrepreneur. Again, presuming that they're staying in the same field and still doing the same kind of work. So that was sort of the evolution of the second podcast. And at this point, both podcasts really focus on helping consultants build their business. And I would say going solo really is about that early transition. How do you make that initial jump from W-2 in the U.S. to 1099, or whether you establish your own business entity as a corporation or LLC, whatever the entity is, but you're going from being an employee and getting a paycheck to getting paid as a consultant. So that's what going solo is about. And smashing the plateau is, okay, you've established your consulting business, you have some stability or sustainability, you see that it's working. What do you want to do next? How do you make it work better for you? What do you need to change in the business model? What do you need to change in terms of your marketing or your branding? What do you need to do differently in terms of how you work with clients, et cetera?
Yep. No, totally makes sense. I mean, on the going solo part, what makes so much sense to me is you identified a niche, like you said, right? And a very specific one that you discovered by listening to, the people that were, basically already kind of part of your tribe. And you found that there was like kind of a sub niche in there, which I think is really, really interesting. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because I know that a bunch of people that will be watching this now or potentially listening later will say, well, I'm actually kind of still working my job. I'm kind of toying with the idea. So, my number hasn't come up yet, if you will, like, on a CFO spreadsheet that you cost too much and we need to, replace you. What do you find are the biggest inhibitions for people that still have their corporate job, are thinking, man, I would like to work for myself, but what gets in the way of people actually making the leap?
There's a false sense of security with the paycheck. You get the same amount of money every payday put into your bank account, and it's very consistent. And for most of us, in order to support our lifestyle, our expenses are fairly fixed. So if your paycheck is enough to meet your expenses to support your lifestyle, it seems very easy. So I would say it seems secure till it isn't. Okay. And the reality is, if you're over the age of 50 in the US, you actually have a greater than 50% likelihood that you will experience job termination. at
Hmm.
some point in your career. And very often there are financial consequences tied to that.
Yep.
So, so I would say there's that false sense of security. The other thing is there's fear, like I've never done this before. I've been,
Yeah.
especially think about somebody who's, let's say 50, 55, 60. You've been working as an employee for 25, maybe 30 years. You know how to do that. And
Hmm.
you know how it works. So with anything new, there's the unknown of we don't know how it works. We don't know if we can actually pull it off.
Right.
There are all the statistics about business failures. The percentage of businesses that make it through the first year is not like the number of people that make it past the first year in a job. So it's right. It can feel very daunting. And so if you've never done it before, it can be quite scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, my good friend Wayne Box Miller kind of took the words out of my mouth. One of the things that the pandemic has shown is one, there's not as much job security as we thought. And then kind of, building on that is the notion that, people are really starting to reevaluate because of the pandemic, and we've had this major jolt to the system, right? That's like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Like, I don't like commuting into the city an hour and a half each way every day, and I actually like being home when my daughter comes home from school, and I like having dinner with my family. All, whatever it is, that people have really started to do kind of like a major, reevaluation. And one of the ways, David, that I've started describing it to people is pre-pandemic, the frame was work, and where does my life fit into that frame? And now it's kind of flipped. It's like, no, the frame now is my life, and where does work fit into my life? But I'm curious, what you've been seeing as people maybe kind of reevaluate or had that reevaluation done for them of going solo. Are you
Oh, very
finding
much
more
so.
people?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has really caused us to do a lot of self-reflection. And as part of the self-reflection, we start to realize, okay, what is most important to me? And how do I do more of what's most important to
Yeah.
me and do less of what's not so important to me?
Yep. And so I would expect, that people who are listening to this are folks that are like, hey, I'm kind of starting to get into that mental space, or maybe I'm already in that mental space of like my paycheck isn't everything. And to your point, people need to pay their bills, and, not trying to minimize the financial requirements that we all have. But I'm also seeing a lot of the discussions I'm having with people that the highest order of good now isn't how much money do I make. It's like that's started to maybe drop down a peg or two, and things like my family, my mental well-being. Like, hey, that job kind of sucked. Like I like the culture, the boss, the whatever. Like I don't like doing that anymore, and it's not worth the money. I would rather start to explore trade-offs, and having that control of having my own business becomes even more attractive.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'll give you one story comes to mind. Laura Rotter, who was a guest on Going Solo, was a well-paid professional on Wall Street for many years, and realized that, and this goes back way before the pandemic. This goes back several years ago. Realized that all of the trappings that came along with a Wall Street job were really not satisfying.
Yeah.
And recreated her life as in her own business, where she helps using her expertise in finance and data and understanding how money works, helping people figure out not only what is enough for them, because she has a great sort of spiritual side to her character.
Yeah.
So figuring out what's enough, but then also doing the financial planning so that they can redesign their lives so that they have enough financially, but they're also doing things that are important to them.
Yeah. So let's kind of build on the idea of, maybe I'm interested, maybe I'm really interested in starting to have my own business. one of the things that kind of occurs to me, and it might be because I'm a salesperson, but I feel like I've heard this some, is like, I'm a chemical engineer. Like, I'm really good at what I'm good at. I got to go find clients. I got to go build a business. How do you talk to people that like are not natural born salespeople?
Well, you can actually do it without spending a lot of time selling, and you definitely don't have to do any kind of hard selling. So what you may have in your mind about what sounds like the icky part of sales is not something you have to do. But there are steps you do need to go through. First one is actually you need to do some self-reflection. And as part of the self-reflection, you need to determine some of the things we've just talked about, like what's really important to you, what matters to you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you enjoy spending your time? Who do you want to spend it with? What kind of work do you love to do? What kind of work are you really good at doing?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you really want to interact with? Who do you want to serve? And what kinds of problems do those people have, whether it's individuals or organizations where you're going to be solving the problem? For those kinds of problems, what do you think you would be best suited to solve based on what you love doing and what you're most competent at doing?
Yep. Yeah, it's
right?
funny. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so the second part of that is you're making a hypothesis about a kind of problem you can solve and for whom. You actually need to go out and do some research on the problem so you can understand the extent of it, the depth of it, the character of these problems. And you need to, as part of your research, you need to determine whether there actually is somebody who has that problem, the extent to which they have the problem, the extent to which they want to solve the problem, the extent to which they want to pay for the solution, and the extent to which they have the capacity to pay for the solution. If you can put all those pieces together, that will give you some data to support your hypothesis that there's a particular kind of problem you can solve and for whom you can solve it. And we could talk more about some of the mechanics of this, but as you're doing that, you will actually build relationships with people who could potentially be your clients.
Well, so, excuse me. So I think you just sort of led into maybe something that, excuse me, our mutual friend, Rock Robinson is sort of saying, like, your podcasts are awesome. And again, I would highly, highly recommend people dig into David's library and his podcast, both Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo. Are there, learnings, books, things that you would help recommend, kind of people guide to figure out some of those marketing things that I was just hearing you describe, resources that you would recommend to folks to get them started on their Going Solo journey?
Actually, a great career book is What Color is Your Parachute? Mm-hmm. That actually lays out some of these things.
Yep.
I haven't actually read that one in a while, but that was a go-to book for me earlier in my career, and I revisit it every so often. Start with Why by Simon Sinek is a good book.
Love that. Yep.
Right. That sort of I think really frames things and helps ground you. Another one that I find really useful is The One Thing by Gary Keller, which kind of divides up what's most important to you into major buckets, and you can plan how you spend your time based on what's most important, based on those major buckets, keeping in mind the 20-80 rule in business and life, which is 20% of our activity produces 80% of our results. So you can kind of reverse engineer the process to achieve the kind of goals that you're working towards.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And there's purpose, right? Which is kind of the start with why kind of thing. But then there's also process, there's structures. Our friend Jamie is very much about scalable processes and documenting all this stuff and being able to figure out the 20-80 or the 80-20, however you want to think about that, so that you actually are focusing on the things that move the needle can dismiss the rest or outsource the rest and let somebody else who can do that, which maybe leads to another thing I wanted to ask you. When we talk about solopreneurs, right, which would imply it's just me and like I'm doing my thing, are there any kind of either words of wisdom, caveats, or other kinds of advice that you would give somebody like, well, yeah, you're doing this by yourself, but you're going to need a one of these and one of these and one of these, and how you kind of build a team, even though you're really a solopreneur?
So first of all, it's a great question, Bob. I have yet to meet a solopreneur who actually really works on his business alone and does everything.
Yeah.
One example that I often use is most business owners have somebody else prepare their tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
That person is part of your team.
Yes.
Whether that person spends a few hours a year or a few hours a week helping you with your business, that person's helping you with your business. So realize that you're actually not doing everything alone, nor should you do everything alone. However, as a solopreneur, the way I define solopreneur is you are the primary offering to your clients. Mm-hmm. So when your clients are buying something, they're buying you, they're buying the relationship with you and also the work that you're doing. But there are elements of running a business that you personally don't need to do, nor should you do. So the two ways to think about building a team are, what is it that you are not particularly competent at doing, but your business needs to be successful? And the second is, what is it that you don't like doing? And you could easily outsource to somebody else, and you would make more money by spending that time doing something where you're getting paid by a client to do it. Yeah. So, as an example, like in my business, as we've talked about, I create a lot of podcasts. And there are parts of the podcast production process that is really about me, and I want to have the relationship with my guests and the relationship with my audience. So I don't have anybody else interview guests. I do that. I don't have anybody else decide who to invite to be a guest. I do that. Yet I have other people who do things like setting up the links to do the recording, or doing the audio editing, or writing some of the material that promotes the episode. I don't have to do that part. So that's just one example.
Yeah, and I give full credit at the very beginning of all these episodes. Heather is the brains and the magic, and I just sort of show up and do the interviewing. So talking about a team, right? And that's kind of within the framework of my business. I know that you're really big on building community with other entrepreneurs. Can you talk about why that's important?
Well, first of all, even as an employee, I was always involved in communities of some sort. So as an example, even back when I was an engineer, I would take part in engineering association activities. And when I was in the nonprofit sector, there were like groups of local executive directors that would meet once a month, and we would talk about some of the things that were going on in our lives and in our work. Yeah. And I always found those to be really helpful. Yeah. And when I became an entrepreneur, one of the things that I realized was my social structure, both the formal and informal structure that I had from my job, suddenly disappeared. So that the formal part, clearly I was not part of anymore. And actually the informal part, people that were my quote unquote friends from work didn't necessarily want to hang out with me now that I was an independent consultant. And there were people that, in particular, since like many other people, as I've described, I was asked to leave, all of a sudden, they really didn't want to be seen hanging out with me. So I needed like a new circle of people. And I also discovered that employees weren't dealing with the same kinds of challenges I was dealing with. Yes, I was still doing the same kind of work, serving the same kinds of clients, because I came out of the nonprofit sector. Yeah. Initially, I was working as a nonprofit management consultant. but my former coworkers didn't have to do business development. They didn't have to do marketing. They didn't have to deal with issues of, what kind of business entity do I need to create? What do I name my business? Who do I need to network with? That they didn't have those issues. So I discovered when I started doing some business networking, when I was spending time with other small business owners, whether they were consultants like me or in different other kinds of businesses, I found that was really helpful. I learned a lot from them. Sometimes I was able to share things that I was doing that they weren't doing. And we were dealing with some of the same kinds of issues. So I found it, reassuring to know that there were other people who had some of the similar kinds of challenges. And I also learned a lot. So I found that community was really important. And as my business has evolved, when I started doing podcasting, I started discovering that there were all these communities of podcasters. As I started doing more and more business online, I discovered there were communities of people that were primarily delivering their services online, which has its own unique set of challenges. So I've always found that communities are helpful. And frankly, now that that my focus in my business is helping consultants build their business following a long career as an employed professional, we now host a community for consultants that are trying to build their business. Same idea, with trainings and with ways to connect with other consultants. One of the things that also happens when you're in a community is you start to develop relationships with people that often lead to ways to collaborate, whether it's a formal strategic partnership or even just doing an event together. Like, as an example, you and I, right? We met through podcasting, and here we are. We're doing an event together. You're hosting, and I'm grateful that you've invited me. But this is a way that we're able to share our expertise with people that would benefit by hearing what we have to say.
Yep. Well, and so, on the community piece, I'm obviously very, married to that ethos. We're better together. And one of the things that I also heard you say was, sometimes you're receiving help and sometimes you're giving help. And so community really is a two-way street. It's not just sort of showing up and seeing what I can get from somebody, but it's also how can I give, back into the community, because it makes the community richer. I think it's just more fulfilling. One of the things I want to make sure that we more than touch on here in some of the remaining time is from your experience with people, who are going solo, and you can take this positive or negative, however is easier to kind of spin it. But the hallmarks of people that you've seen go on to be successful as they would measure success, not as I would measure their success, but they're doing what they want to do. They're making the money they want to make. They're helping their clients, making a difference, bringing value. Are there hallmarks that you see of the people that end up being really good at that, or conversely, sort of the signs of people that, kind of typically flame out?
Oh, yeah, very much. And I like to think of people that are in creative fields as a good analogy. So somebody who is, let's say the person is some kind of creative artist. They may be really good at creating their art, or they may be really good at running their business, or they might be good at both. And if you think about your experience when you go shopping for art, there are those people that are that you may come across periodically that do very little in the way of business development, marketing, selling, creating awareness. And they might be really good at creating their art, but they often struggle financially. There are those that you may come across who are really out there in terms of marketing and selling, but their art might not be so great. They usually make a living, but you might not be so impressed to buy their stuff that much. And then there are the people that are really good at both creating the art and marketing and selling it. And those are the ones that thrive, both because they're creating the kind of art that they want to create, and they're also making a decent living.
Yep.
So the same thing is true when you're selling knowledge or ideas. Your knowledge and ideas can be really great at solving problems, but if you are working for yourself or somehow working in your own business, if you don't understand the business piece and you haven't put those pieces together, you're probably going to struggle financially. And if you are if you're really good at marketing and selling, but the quality of what you produce is weak, you'll probably do okay. You probably pay the bills. But I don't know that you're going to have lots of raving fans. So what you really want to do is focus on something you're really good at, and also figure out how to build a business that will be successful as a business and support you doing the work that you love.
Yeah, well, you kind of, because I know this is part of your tagline, but doing the work that you love and getting paid what you deserve. And, finding that subject matter expert, right? The art person, in your case, that creative, who also has the business knowledge. A lot of times that business knowledge lags pretty significantly to their area of expertise, which again, to me, speaks so much to the value of being in a community, so that you can kind of scale that part of your competencies up much more quickly than kind of, doing this all by yourself, learning the hard way. One of my favorite expressions is good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Like you'll learn the lesson, kind of one way or the other, but it really depends on hey, but I ran out of money before I got my degree in this thing, so, for a lot of folks that I know that will be listening to this, it's, you've developed a career's worth of expertise in something. Running a business around that may not be part of the package today. And so for me, the quicker that you can get plugged in, and I'm raising my hand saying I'm benefiting from this myself, the quicker that you can get plugged into people who've already done this and have successfully started their own business, and get the benefit of their knowledge, that you don't end up in the trash heap with that was a great idea. You're a really good artist. You just don't know how to market and sell it. Didn't mean you're a bad artist, just means you weren't good at that part of it. So how do you shore that up more quickly? And then it gets back to community and team for me.
Yeah, but Bob, imagine, for somebody watching this or listening, if you're part of Bob's community or our community, if you spend 1 hour a week interacting with people in the community, you take away one idea a week that you can implement. Just think about that. And you could actually spend less than an hour a week interacting with people in a community and take away one idea a week. Even if you implement 10% of what you learn over the course of the year, that already is 5 ideas that you wouldn't have known about without the community.
Wow. Well, I told you while we were in the green room getting ready to come on that your guest from Monday inspired me with a LinkedIn post that I did on Monday of this week. That was one of the best ones, that we've had all year. And it's there you go. One idea. I got inspired by somebody who knows more about something than I do, tried to execute it the best way I could. And lo and behold, I had a better result than had I not invested in trying to get, just a little bit better this week. So I think that's spot on. Here's an interesting question. You've been doing this for a long time, both on your own. You obviously also had this massive wealth of knowledge that you've accumulated from all the guests that you've interviewed. If you could go back and talk to David 15 years ago, starting out, what would you have done differently?
Actually, what I probably, and I hadn't thought about this before you just asked this question now, although I thought about this in advance, but this is a different answer than I would have come up with. I actually would have spent time following the process I described earlier, which is not only doing the self-reflection, that part I did, but actually doing the market research. I think I would have more than likely found a slightly different niche that I think would probably have been more successful in a business framework faster than what I've done over the last 15 years. So the market research is something that I could have done a better job on.
Yep. So, I think that's, what I would kind of put on a general category of preparation, right? And just doing as much fact finding as you can and being open, to, I went into Career Club with some preconceived ideas, but I also had 10 years of basically market research by helping people in job search. So I had a pretty good body of knowledge coming into this. But, I think it was General Eisenhower, somebody's like, battle plans are great until the bullets start flying. And, like just being flexible and like continuing to listen to the market and, not being so married to just an idea, but being willing to kind of bend and flex and go with gravity. Like if the market's telling you it wants something and it wants it delivered in a certain way, then that's kind of incumbent upon me to figure out, how can I shape the offering to fit what the market says that it wants. Now, you're getting a compliment here from Robin. Says, you're just very pleased with the services and, how you kind of help the emotional stamina. That's a true statement, of people doing their own thing. And then do you want to talk just a little bit about your ebook? Because it's got 49 tips. I think.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Maybe back to Rock's question on, resources that might help somebody.
This is a pretty easy one and it's free. We've taken 49 of our most popular episodes out of the 700 plus that we've produced so far. And there's a bonus question that I ask guests after we finish the recording. So these are not, they're not part of the podcast episodes, but I ask them to provide one actionable tip that help them produce the results that we discussed in the episode. So everything that we discuss up until that point kind of gets boiled down to one really short tip. So we've taken 49 of these tips and we've organized them into 4 buckets. So there's and these are the themes that seem to be the most common themes that we discuss on the podcast. So one obviously is business development, because that's a big one for people. Relationship building is one. Mindset is another one. And the last one is productivity. People want to be able to do what they're doing more effectively. So you can get the ebook by going to our website, smashingtheplateau.com. /tips will bring up the ebook. So smashingtheplateau.com/tips, TIPS.
Awesome. I want to acknowledge a comment here from my good friend Kelly Smith. So no bashing creatives, and nobody's bashing creatives, but he makes, I think, a more broad point that doesn't apply just to creatives. But many creative people get absolutely no business or marketing training. Design schools typically don't do budgeting, marketing, running a business, biz dev, and I would agree with Kelly. It is a big miss. And I think that's probably true in a lot of disciplines, that they don't really teach you how a business really works.
Can we talk about this? Do we have a few more minutes for this?
As much time.
This is like a huge topic, and this is one of the things that drives me crazy about the American educational system, which is in higher education, you don't get any training for running a business. I certainly didn't learn anything about being an entrepreneur when I was in college or grad school as an engineer. Engineers are supposed to be making companies more successful, but we learned nothing about actually running, particularly a small business. And I don't know what the MBA education is like nowadays, but I know it was designed to help people become in leadership roles in big companies, which is very different than being a solopreneur. Law school doesn't teach you how to run a law practice. Medical school doesn't teach you. Nowadays, everything is now run by the big hospitals. But it used to be that you could, you became a doctor and you'd basically run a small business as a doctor, or a dentist. Certainly, you do that. So none of these teach you anything. And frankly, forget about college and higher education. In our basic education, we don't teach basic financial literacy, and which is like the bedrock of being able to survive as an adult. And frankly, what you need to do as a business owner is not that much different than what you need to do to financially run your household.
Yeah. Yep. No, you're right. It is a giant miss. And, I think the oxygen in all of this is cash flow, and people don't understand cash flow. Hey, everyone I sell is really profitable. Great. Nobody's paying you, or you're paying your vendors faster than you're getting paid. And like, I sold a bunch of stuff and the margin on this is really good. Yeah, but you ran out of money, and that's how businesses go away. So yes.
The number one cause of business failure is lack of cash.
Yep. So I used to work for Dun & Bradstreet, which is, in the business credit world. And one of my all-time favorite signs that a credit manager had in his office is, in God we trust, all others pay cash. So it works. So is there one item, if you had to boil all this down, that you would want to leave our audience with, David?
Yeah. Don't let fear in your way. Just get started.
Yeah.
Get going.
Heather, you want to put that?
Planning is great, but execution is really where it's at.
Yeah. You were talking about social media earlier, and the way one person said it that kind of stuck with me is, don't wait for perfect to press post. And like you said, you're putting yourself out there, maybe more than a little bit, as you said, and my empathy level is 100%. First episode, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm not qualified to do this. And you just kind of keep doing it and hopefully getting better as you go. But I want to thank you, David, because I think that, you've inspired, but also instructed, that there is life outside of corporate America, and that there is a path, there's a way, there's a process to get there, and what you're doing, in your consulting practice. And guys, all these podcasts are free. Like, go get the 49 Tips book. Go listen to some of these amazing people that David has as guests. I mean, it's a university level education on how to have a successful consulting practice. And so, Dave, that's why I'm so honored that, you spent a few minutes with me here today. If people wanted to contact you or learn more about your business, how would they do that?
You can go to smashingtheplateau.com. That is the repository for everything about what we do. You can get in touch with me there. There's a contact form. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm the only David Shriner-Cahn in the world, so I'm pretty easy to find. You just reach out. I'd be happy to spend a few minutes chatting with you if you have questions.
Awesome. Well, it has been really a pleasure and a privilege today, David. So thank you. And thank you for everybody who has been with us live. And if you see this on the replay, thank you so much for doing that. And with that, thank you, everyone. And Heather, thank you so much for being such a great hostess.
Thank you.